Well, we're about to start the fourth week of the Rugby World Cup for 2023 in France, and so far it's been absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure it's only going to get better from here on in. So in this video I thought I'd give a bit of a review on where we're at the moment, what I think about some of the teams, and who's surprised me so far in this year's Rugby World Cup, all coming up in this video. G'day and welcome to Inside Rugby. My name is Mark, if you haven't been here before, and I'm a Kiwi rugby fan who's currently living in Cancun in Mexico, and it's a beautiful place to be. And I have to say, a lot of the comments in my videos are a little bit off the mark because a lot of you talk about me being a very biased Southern Hemisphere rugby fan, and the fact is I've lived most of my life in Europe and have spent more time at the Principality Stadium in Twickenham than I have in Eden Park and the Melbourne Cricket Ground. So I'm probably one of the least biased Kiwis out there. But for all that, let's get stuck into this video, and I thought it'd be time to have a chat about where we're at in this year's Rugby World Cup, because there's been some really interesting things happen. Of course, we've had a couple of really big games in that opening game between France and the New Zealand All Blacks, and we had that big game last weekend between Ireland and South Africa. So maybe the pecking order in this year's Rugby World Cup is starting to look a little bit obvious, but maybe it's not as well, and there's a lot of things to take into consideration. So in this video I just want to talk about where we're at so far and have a look at how things are going for some of the teams. Now, I don't want to get into ranking teams or anything like that at this stage. I just want to talk about some of the performances that I've watched. I've watched every game so far of the Rugby World Cup, and some of the teams that I had certain expectations around coming into this year's competition have disappointed me, and other teams have exceeded my expectations. And that could be because I haven't seen them play a lot of rugby lately, and some of the trajectories of the teams coming into this year's tournament has been a little bit different than what we had expected. So let me talk about that right now. So first of all, we can't get past that Ireland and South Africa game, and I think it was probably the most intense game of the Rugby World Cup so far, if you're an Irish or a South African fan, and also if you're a rugby aficionado, because I think it was just one of those games that really was compelling to watch. It was very intense, it was very well played by both teams, and let's face it, at the end there was only a few inches in it. It could have gone either way based on goal kicking or a few other things. So I think those two teams are pretty evenly matched. But now, I haven't watched a lot of Ireland playing over the last couple of years, so seeing them in this Rugby World Cup and seeing them coming in with the kind of trajectory they're on has been really interesting to me as a rugby fan. And I've got to say, the thing that really sticks out for me with Ireland is their rugby IQ. I think they're a very intelligent rugby team, and they know what to do, when to do it, and they've got a really good way of executing their game management plan, and I think that's going to hold them in good stead. Let's face it, there's a lot of good rugby players in this tournament. There's a lot of big forwards, there's a lot of physicality, there's a lot of mobility, but when you can put your intelligence together on the pitch as a team, that takes you to the next level, and that's what I see in this Ireland group at the moment. So I think Andy Farrell's done a really fantastic job in putting this intellect into the Irish rugby and allowing them not only to express themselves on the field, but to find solutions to problems as games go on. And of course, that's going to become really, really important in the knockout stage of this year's tournament. So hats off to Ireland, very good team to watch playing. You know, in games like that Romania game, they were free flowing, they scored a lot of tries. They've got some standout players in that team already in this tournament, and I think Bundy Aki, for me, is the player of the tournament so far in this year's Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you think about that option there. So yeah, really well done from Ireland so far, and I think they're kind of at the top of the tree as far as I'm concerned in terms of having that rugby IQ that's going to get them a long way in this year's competition. And then of course Ireland played against South Africa, and a lot was talked about with the Springboks coming into this game. They came up with this idea of the 7-1 split off the bench, and a lot of people were questioning whether that was the right thing to do. And a lot of people have been talking about their goal kicking percentages before we even got into this tournament, and we've seen that kind of unravel a little bit in the tournament. But I think the Springboks have learnt a lot from that game against Ireland. And again, I think Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus have to go away and think about their game management plan. Because to beat Ireland, you need to come up with something just more than physicality. And I think South Africa have the weapons in their team to do this. Maybe some of the players are playing out of position at the moment. I'm talking particularly about Damian Willemse. I think that having him in the centre somewhere and perhaps bringing in someone like a Kainan Moody to really set that South African backline ignite would be something that could do wonders for the Springboks in this tournament. And it would be unfortunate if the Springboks went through this tournament just relying on their forward power, because they do have a lot of weapons in their back. And I would like to see their game evolve a little bit. And I've said this for a number of years actually to just friends and fellow rugby colleagues who just talk about the Springboks having this amazing depth of back talent, and they really don't use it sometimes to their full advantage. And I think that's what's happening or happened against the Irish. So I'd like to see the Springboks throw a little bit more caution to the wind and give these backs a good opportunity to show the talent that they've got, because putting tries on the board just adds so much more scoreboard pressure in these big games. And that's something that I thought was lacking from the Springboks, and particularly when they have this goal kicking scenario going on at the moment where they can't rely on that 100%. And some other teams who are very, very efficient with their goal kicking, and even if you look at teams like Wales and Tonga, they've got very consistent goal kicking alternatives in their team, and the Springboks haven't been able to show that yet. So I'd like to see the Springboks play a more open, expansive game and taking a little bit more risk and reward, because I think they have more than the potential to do that. Let me know what you think about that in the comments, as I'm sure you will. And you know, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people will say, well, the Springboks game is very simple, it's all about power and up front, and that's the way it's been for decades. Well, for me, that doesn't mean it can't change and it can't evolve. And I think we've seen that in Ireland and how they've evolved their game. They used to be a 10-man kicking game years ago, and now they're a 15-man running game, but also having the power and the ability in the forwards to get to that breakdown. And with Van der Fleer and Omani and Doris, they've got a fantastic trio there at the back. So I think South Africa has to fight fire with fire in a lot of respects. And if you look at teams like France and the All Blacks, you know, they've been running the ball for years, and the Springboks can match them or even be better if they allow their weapons to get out there and play that kind of game. So I think this is a lot around the psychology of the South African team, how they've played over many, many years. And you know, let's face it, it's a bit of a risk to change that up, particularly mid-tournament, and they're probably not going to do it. But that's just some of the things that I've been thinking about with this South African team. And then we have France. Well, they've of course been super impacted by Antoine Dupont's departure or injury from the team. We can't say yet he's departing, because he could be back in the later stages of this tournament. Let's hope he is. He's had the operation on his cheek, and let's hope it recovers really quickly, because the tournament would be better off, and World Rugby would be better off by having Antoine Dupont back in this Rugby World Cup. France, to me, have been showing a really good hand. I think they're a very good team. Of course, they're going to be impacted by Dupont's absence in the meantime, but I think they've got the power to do what they need to do in the upcoming games in this Rugby World Cup. And the first thing is to qualify and to get out of the pool stage, and of course they're going to do that quite comfortably, I think. So I've been impressed with France. I think they've got an amazing amount of talent in the back line. They can score tries from anywhere on the field, and they've got forwards this year that are also intelligent and able to pick the game. So I think France is still a major threat in this tournament. I think that quarter-final matchup is going to be really, really exciting. And of course, we're going to see two of the big teams go home at that stage of the tournament. But that's what it's all about. We want to see the best teams playing against the best teams. And as we saw last weekend between Ireland and South Africa, it doesn't matter at what stage of the tournament these teams meet each other. It just brings something so much special to the Rugby World Cup. So France, for me, are still on track. I think they're a very dangerous team. They're a team that has the weapons to be able to get up and beat defences like South Africa and like Ireland. And I think they have the firepower in their backline to do that. It's going to come down to whether or not they can get a sufficient ball in those critical knockout games to be able to do that. but I don't want to get one step ahead of us. So let's just focus on where they are at right now. And of course they've got the crowd, and haven't the crowd's been absolutely fantastic so far in this Rugby World Cup in every game, whether it be the French crowds in the French games, but also the other nations coming together, the singing in the stadiums, the camaraderie. Been watching a lot of videos of people outside the stadiums as well, being interviewed and talking about the games. It just feels as though France is putting on an absolutely fantastic Rugby World Cup. So hats off, or berets off, to the French for doing such a fantastic job in creating this tournament. And I think this is going to give their team a lot of emphasis and a lot of belief as they go forward. So they're going to gel around each other because of this Antoine Dupont situation. I'm sure he's still going to be in there giving them a lot of motivation, calling a lot of shots, being a leader like he is. He's a fantastic rugby player off the field as well, and we've got to remember that and how much he can add to this French team. So I think with Dupont still in the squad, still being in there and giving these guys a bit of a rev up, I think we're going to see France continue on this great trajectory they're on in this year's tournament. And the next up I want to talk about is England. And if you've been watching my videos about England playing rugby in the last few games, you'll probably think that I'm a little bit biased towards England, and I haven't been impressed by their previous game plans. But I tell you what, I'm changing my opinion, and I think England now could go a long way in this Rugby World Cup, and let me tell you why. First of all, the performance by George Ford was absolutely fantastic against Argentina. He managed that game very, very well. And when England were down to 14 men, he was able to control it, and he took it upon his own shoulders to really do something fantastic in that game. And I think that game particularly gave England a lot of confidence. And then when they came out and they played their next game, they were really on song again. And I see England really growing into this tournament. And what I see England at now is there's no doubt they're going to make it through to the knockout stage, and this is where England can be very dangerous. England know how to win knockout rugby, and they don't have to play pretty rugby to do that. And let's face it, the team that wins the Rugby World Cup, they're the champions of the world for 4 years. And I think Steve Borthwick and the team now understand that by getting into that knockout stage, they've got 3 big games in front of them that they can use a variety of different styles to try and win those knockout games. And let's face it, they could go to the semi-finals quite easily, and then it's only 2 games to win the Rugby World Cup. So I'm getting more impressed with England. I don't care what people say about their attractive level of play, but what I saw against Japan was a team that's really building into this tournament, and they've really got some options now, I believe. Farrell's back in there, of course, but I think George Ford's been doing a really good plan in terms of the way he comes in off the bench as well. And Marcus Smith at fullback, I think, was a really good move. I think he just brings not only something different on attack, but he also gives the opposition something to think about and something they need to plan against. So yeah, I think England could do something big in this year's Rugby World Cup now, so watch them as we continue through the tournament. Okay, time to talk about my beloved All Blacks, and well, I'm not going to stray away from what I said before the tournament, where I posted a video about the 6 challenges that I think the All Blacks are going to struggle with in this year's Rugby World Cup, and woe and behold, they're coming to fruition as well. So I'm not going to change my mind about the All Blacks. They're not going to win this Rugby World Cup. I'm absolutely positive of that now. There's too many other good teams in this year's Rugby World Cup who are playing really good rugby. And they're playing good rugby, whether it be open rugby, tight rugby, and intelligent rugby. And I think the All Blacks have got too many missing parts at this year's Rugby World Cup to be a significant factor at the back end of the tournament. Now that's coming from a Kiwi, right? And I know I'm going to get a lot of haters out there, and I'm going to get a lot of Kiwis that are knocking on me. I'm going to stick to my original thoughts around the All Blacks. I think there's something really missing in this team, and I think it's going to be showing up very quickly. It's going to be interesting to see how they go against Italy this week. It really is, because they've had a layoff now. They're going to come back into it. They had that easy game against Namibia, and now Italy are going to give them something else and something different to look at. I'm not going to say Italy's going to win this game, but what I'm saying is we're going to see the All Blacks at their true level, I think, in this game against Italy. And let's see who they put on the field. They're probably going to get a couple of their players back on, and I'll make a preview video of that before we get into the weekend. But yeah, I haven't been super impressed with the All Blacks at all. They were missing quite a bit against France, and I don't think France played their best game in that first game for a number of reasons, and I stated that in the review video. I think with the whole furl around and pressure on France to start the opening game in the Rugby World Cup, I think they did a very, very good job to hold that together, beat the All Blacks on the day and come away with the win. And since then, France have only got better in this tournament. Whereas the All Blacks struggling with injuries, struggling with the red card situation, discipline's been bad, and they've really looked poor in some of that decision-making process on the field in their games. And I think Italy is going to expose a little bit of that, but I fear whoever they come up against in the quarterfinals, the All Blacks, they're going to have some major problems. So yeah, that's where I sit on the All Blacks at the moment. Let me know what you think. Bring it on. I'm ready for the comments. Back up in the Northern Hemisphere now, time to talk about Wales, and wasn't that a great win against Australia? Forget about how poorly Australia played in that game and how poorly they are as a rugby unit at the moment. Talk about Wales and how they're growing and how they're developing and how they're creating a great trajectory. And I think Warren Gatland's got a little piece of magic going on here. He's able to get a team fit enough and self-belief in Rugby World Cups to really make a difference and to grow into the tournament, and that's what Gatland's doing once again. He really is a good coach, isn't he? And I think he's showing with what he's done with this Welsh team. There's a combination there of a little bit of youth and quite a bit of experience, and the Welsh are cashing in on that. I just hope Dan Beggar's injury is not going to derail them too much, although what we saw from Gareth Anscombe in that game against Australia was pretty special as well. But it's more than a one-man team, and that's what I like about Wales. They're hunting in this Rugby World Cup as a unit, and it reminds me a bit of Ireland. You know, I don't think Ireland are 100% focused with Johnny Sexton. I think it's a team that can come together to make a really big difference in this Rugby World Cup, and I get that feeling about Wales. I think as a unit their forwards are good and they're getting better, and I think their backs have got that belief, but their defensive pattern, defensive system is very, very good. So yeah, I've been impressed with Wales in this Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you think about Wales. And again, taking away the fact that Australia are poor, I think it took a good team in Wales to put 40 points on against Australia, and they played to the 81st minute in that Welsh team. They didn't slacken off at all, and there's a lot of belief in that team. So yeah, I've been impressed with Wales so far, and of course they're on that side of the draw as well, which helps them out going forward. So let's stay with the Northern Hemisphere, and we're talking Scotland now, and just saw that game from Scotland in the weekend against Tonga, and pretty much as I expected. I thought Tonga would fall off with their discipline and their energy levels in that second spell, and that's exactly what happened. I see a lot of Scotland's play, coming from Finn Russell, and I think they're a little bit reliant on Finn Russell, and if they can shut Finn Russell down, whoever plays against Scotland, a bit like South Africa did, then I think Scotland might have some troubles. So again, this is a team that's got the potential. They've got some fantastic backs, and the likes of Hugh Jones and Tupilotu, and then Darcy Graham and Duhan van der Merwe and Kinghorn at the back. These are very special rugby players, and it takes, of course, Finn Russell to ignite these guys, but these guys have got to get involved in the game, and I like the way that I see players like van der Merwe coming in, looking busy, looking to get the ball. And that's what I think is a need of a new wing in this generation that we're playing in World Rugby. I think the wingers need to get hungrier and get in there and look for the ball, and I think that's what Scotland needs to do. So I don't know whether their forwards can go up against the best in the world and beat them, but I would put Scotland just a fraction behind the top teams at the moment. I just don't believe that over the course of this tournament, and I made a video about this before the tournament got underway, the consistency of going back to back over too many games against the top teams, that's where I think Scotland's going to come unattached. And I think if teams focus on closing down Finn Russell, then I think Scotland are going to struggle. So let me know what you think on that one. Do you think I've got it right with Finn Russell for Scotland, or am I missing something, and Scotland are going to bring something that we haven't seen yet in this year's Rugby World Cup? Okay, let's jump down to the Pacific Islands, and it's Fiji's time to be talked about. And a lot of people are impressed with Fiji, myself included, but I think we just need to remember something, okay? They're coming into this Rugby World Cup with the best build-up and the best experience that they've had in any build-up to any Rugby World Cup, and that's credit to them because they're now playing in that Super Rugby competition in New Zealand, and they're getting a lot of experience from doing so. But I think what's going to be really interesting with this Fiji team is let's watch them play the next two games, Georgia and Portugal. These are two games where everybody's going to expect Fiji to win, and probably win quite handsomely. And I think this is going to show the true character of this Fiji team. We're going to see how they go against these so-called lesser nations. And Portugal have impressed me so far in this year's Rugby World Cup, just from the fact that they get out there, they've got a lot of spirit, they've got a lot of skill in that team. They've still got a long way to go in World Rugby, but I tell you what, they can score tries from anywhere on the field. And a team like that, and a team like Georgia, might be quite disruptive for Fiji to get over the top of. And since Fiji's had this resurrection in their rugby game, they've got to be able to put teams away like this a lot easier. So it's going to be interesting for me to see how Fiji take on these two lesser nations, and that's going to tell us a lot about where Fiji really are. You know, we've seen them beat England, we've seen them nearly beat Wales, and we've seen them beat Australia, and that's all fantastic. But now we've got to see them continue consistency in beating the smaller rugby playing nations and see whether they can put them away. And when we watch games like South Africa and Romania and Scotland and Tonga, we see these top teams putting these other teams away and really being able to work out how to play against them from their disruptive patterns. And that's going to be an important thing for Fiji to do in these two upcoming games. So keep your eye on Fiji. Now I've got a list of 4 teams that have what has pretty much disappointed me so far in this year's Rugby World Cup, and that's because I think they came into this year's competition with a little bit of emphasis, and they had some good build-up and all the rest of it, but they haven't really delivered. And the first team I'm going to mention is Argentina. Been really disappointed in Argentina so far in the Rugby World Cup. Yes, they had that last win, but it wasn't that comprehensive, and we haven't seen the true ability of this Argentinian team, and I really can't put my finger on it at this stage. I think it's something to do with Santiago Carreras, their number 10. He hasn't been playing at the top of his game, and he's really a key component of the Argentinian backline and getting them moving forward and running off really good angles. And for me, there's just something been missing in his particular game. And also the forwards haven't been as dominant as I would expect an Argentinian pack to be. And that may simply be the rest of the world's catching up, and Argentina need to have something new brought into their game. But yeah, they've kind of impressed me so far as Argentina. What do you think of the Los Pumas? Have they lived up to your expectation? Do you think they're going to go deep into this tournament, or do you think they're on a trajectory now that's going to take them into the knockout phase of this particular tournament? Now, another team that's disappointed me so far in this year's tournament has been Japan. And we all love the cherry blossoms, don't we? They bring a sparkle to the Rugby World Cup, and in 2019 when it was in their country, it was a very special tournament, and we'll never forget those amazing Japanese fans and how much we all love them, and their team lived up to that expectation as well. But unfortunately they haven't come to this party very well, have they? I think they played better against England, no doubt about it, but again England went up another level and Japan weren't able to go with them. So Jamie Joseph, the head coach of Japan, his days are numbered, of course. He's going back to New Zealand to coach, and I hope this is going to be a new cycle for Japan, because unfortunately they've under-delivered for me in this year's Rugby World Cup. So let me know what you think it is. They've got a lot of new players coming in through this new regulation process, and I think that's probably had something to do with it. I just can't put my finger on it with Japan. But they've underwhelmed me a little bit so far in this year's tournament. Maybe they're going to come right in the next couple of games. Beautiful day here in Cancun again. We're heading into autumn, would you believe, and it's going to be 38 degrees Celsius today, so it's an amazing part of the world, that's for sure. Okay, carrying on in my video, and the next two teams that have kind of underwhelmed me so far in this year's Rugby World Cup are two Pacific Island nations, Tonga and Samoa. Let's start with Tonga. And that game against Scotland, they fell away at the end. Their discipline was bad, and it's a little bit unfortunate because, like most people out there, we want to see the Pacific Island nations playing well. They bring so much to the game, so much excitement, but the days are over where we can just rely on big, heavy, brute power and brute strength from these guys. You know, it's all very well rugby commentators talking about, oh, he's 140 kilos and he's 6'9" and all the rest of it. If they haven't got the execution skills, they're not going to win these big games. and that's what lets these two nations down on a lot of occasions. So Samoa, number 10, they've got a weakness, as I've been alluding to in this year's Rugby World Cup. Their kicking decisions are poor, and their execution skills, their drop passes, there's too many, their discipline, there's too much of it going the wrong way. And these are things that they need to tighten up to be real forces in world rugby, and we see how Fiji's done that. And hopefully now that Tonga and Samoa are going to get more competition, we hopefully are going to see the standard of their play and also their coaching, because the two things go hand in hand, I believe. So yeah, Tonga and Samoa both have underwhelmed me so far in this year's Rugby World Cup. They've got to find the ability to be able to go 80 minutes toe-to-toe with these teams and be able to keep the pressure on. So when their benches come on, they've got to have the same level of player, and maybe depth is an issue. Of course, they're selecting from much smaller pools of people than what the bigger nations are, so it's only to be expected. But we all know how much talent there is in the Pacific Islands, and I've actually spent a little bit of time there over my years, and when I see the young kids running around there with rugby balls in their hand and bare feet and on the beaches, it's just astounding to see the athleticism and the ability that they have. And that ability needs to be nurtured, it needs to be coached properly from a young age, and then it needs to be brought through a pathway. And I think these are things that World Rugby need to help Tonga and Samoa invest in, bringing investment into the country so they get good coaching systems, but they have pathways where players can go in, get good competition, but they also stay at it, and they want to be rugby players and follow in the footsteps of this generation. I think that's what's really needed in Samoa and Tonga. Now Tonga's going to come up against South Africa this week. It's going to be a huge game for them, a quick turnaround for both of those teams, and it's going to be interesting to see how they go. I'm sure the Springboks have got a few sore muscles from that Irish game, but I'm sure the Tongans too have from the Scottish game that they played. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think the Springboks are going to demolish Tonga, to be honest. I think they're going to run all around them, and they're going to show that ability that I talk about in the Springbok backline. And I just think Tonga are on a bit of a slippery slope at the moment in this year's Rugby World Cup. And unfortunately for Kefu, the head coach, and the boys, they're coming up against some of the best teams in world rugby. But that's exactly the kind of experience they need to have. And I guess instead of looking at the glass half empty, you've got to look at it half full. So all these players are going to get wonderful experience. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I think the Springboks are going to hammer Tonga in that second 20 minutes of the second half, and they're already going to have a good lead by then. So there's a few nations that are kind of underwhelmed me so far. I don't need to talk about Australia. We know what's going on there. It's been all over the press. I am going to make a separate video getting in depth about what's going on in rugby in Australia. I lived there for 20 years. I know a lot about, well, I've been privy to a lot of what's going on in Rugby Australia, so I'm going to share that here on my channel and just give my opinions on what the Australian Rugby Union need to do going forward to fix the problems they have down there, because boy, do they have a lot of problems in that rugby union at the moment. So needless to say, I didn't want to throw Australia in that bunch of teams that are underwhelmed me. It's fairly obvious at this stage. But there's one other team that has really impressed me so far at this Rugby World Cup. I've watched their game so far, and that was Portugal, and I think they're doing really fantastically well. Patrice Largesset, their coach from France, was a good rugby player in his day on the wing for France, scored a lot of tries, particularly against us, the All Black team. And he's got this Portugal team playing really entertaining rugby, and I was really gutted to see that they couldn't finally get the points win against Georgia the other day. It was a cracking game, and they came back really into that game in the second half, and to have an 18-all draw at the end was really fantastic for Portugal rugby. So I hope they have a great remainder of this tournament. They're entertainers. I love their fans. They're fantastic people, and they've really been a shining star for me so far in this year's tournament. I think Portugal and having teams like that in this tournament are absolutely fantastic. And I know a lot of you comment about it's a waste of time having these smaller nations in the Rugby World Cup, but when you see games like that Georgia and Portugal game, for me it was just as exciting as watching some of the top teams play as well, if you're a true fan of rugby union, and that's what that game brought me. So hats off to everybody involved in Portugal rugby at the moment. It's really fantastic. You've got a lot of great fans as well, and I just simply love watching you guys play, so keep up the good work. So there we go, there's a recap after week 3 of this year's Rugby World Cup. As I said, we're about to start week 4 tomorrow with a game between Uruguay and Namibia in Pool A. And I'm giving that one to Uruguay, by the way, no secrets there. And then we're going to see New Zealand play Italy on Friday, and I think that's going to be really good for the reasons that I mentioned. I will make a preview about that game, so keep checking my channel and checking on the videos that I'm going to be posting. And if you haven't yet subscribed and you think I earn the right of your subscription, then I'd love that and I'd be very, very grateful for it. I try to bring a very neutral and unbiased approach to my recognition of World Rugby. I'm living here in Mexico. I love the game. I've been following it for many, many years. I've still got a lot to learn about it and how to pronounce a lot of the players' names. But hey, between us all, we're having a great time watching this year's Rugby World Cup. So if you want to keep doing that, hang around with me on Inside Rugby. Let me know about the teams that I've spoken about today, the ones that I think are impressing. Have you got any thoughts around that? I'd love to read your comments on it. And I'll see you again in another video really, really soon. Don't forget to check out the video I'm going to make about Australia and all the problems in Australian rugby. That could be quite insightful for a lot of people who don't know about those things. Okay, I'll be back again soon in another video. Until then, everyone, stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying the Rugby World Cup from France. And if you're over there in France, have a wonderful time. It looks absolutely fantastic, and yes, I'm very jealous of you all. See you again soon. Bye for now.